All right, people of faith, let's take another walk. Let's take another walk. Let's talk on the subject of fear versus faith. Fear versus faith. And I don't know if you guys can see this, but this is my writing. This is a little scribble. But this is what God has given me about fear and faith. Okay, let's break this down. All right, let's start with let's say like if we were to start with the subject of fear. Um, and we go from fear to faith, and we, if and when the Holy Spirit directs, we'll go as follow. We'll follow as He leads. Okay. Let's see. Let's say, for example, if we were to use the coronavirus. All right. Okay. Let's say that this is the template of the institution or to install fear. Okay. Or the fear itself. Okay. Corona equals crowned, right? So if you were to, the purpose of a crown is to place on someone's head. Let's see, because that's to deem them as authority. Correct? A crown is to deem something as authority. Okay, so the coronavirus is actually to offer fear, which in other words is designed to crown something that's not of his own, of authority. Right? So if fear is already fear, it doesn't need a crown because it already has itself. The purpose of a crown is to place a design order of someone or something that has not, I guess, doesn't have the authorization of the crowning. Jesus became the king of the Jews after he did what he did. He was Lord of Lord after he did what he did. So he was crowned that after he conquered or whatever the authorization was given to him to be crowned king. Okay, so the crown of corona, which is, let's say, the coronavirus itself is to actually to offer fear, right? So it's the suggestion or the entry door to fear. All right, so if corona means crown and the coronavirus equals the offered door or the door towards fear, we have to place that crown on something that is not fear based. So if the world is based upon fear, it's predicated on fear. Let's break down fear. All right. Fear is a separation from God. It's or separation from love. Let's say it that way. Fear is the separation from love. Fear is the separation from love. Can't say that enough. Okay, so if the crown of fear is going to be placed on someone, it has to be of someone of love to do what? To separate them from that love. Now, if we're going to break down love, love is God. God is love. Love is without weakness. Love is without flaw. Love has no fear because fear has torment. So the coronavirus is there to suggest torment to the soul. Or in other words, is to place a crown of torment on the soul. Now, what particular soul is going after? It's not going after something that's already fear bound. So if a person was already inside of fear, or fear was inside of their soul already, let's say it this way. If fear, inside the soul, there's a director's chair. And who's going to direct it is going to either be two realities. Let's go down here. We can see it here. We have two realities. You're either going to have life or death that's going to direct the soul. Life or death, or we would say love or fear, is going to direct the soul. So whoever gets that director's chair and is going to direct that soul how it's going to reproduce. How it's going to, reproduce. How it's going to birth to the world. Okay, so let's say if go back over to here, if fear is sitting in the director's chair, is going to reproduce torment to the rest of the world. through very different ways, and mainly it's going to go through the disobedience of God's order of love. If anybody wants to see the demonstration of God, or if somebody wants to walk in God's order of love, then we would talk about the Ten Commandments. Yesterday, I was just informed that the Ten Commandments is like half and half. It's like half of those who the Ten Commandments is half and half. It's half five. The first 5 verses is like to how to love God, and then the second 5 verses how to love your neighbor. All right. So love works like this: it's placing love number one, or placing God number one. In other words, placing God in the director's chair inside your soul. So if you're going to honor the Ten Commandments, you are submitting, or you are obedient to the voice of love, which you are saying God is love, and love is without torment. So which means it has no fear. So that's why it's perfect. That's why it has no weakness. Anything that has fear has a weakness. All right. So we were born into sin, and sin is actually without faith. We was born in separation from God because of the act of one man's disobedience, which was Adam. That created the separation. That created the doubt to follow God's command, which would be His command of love. And if there's doubt there, that means something is there to interrupt the flow of God. All right. So death itself is there to interrupt life. All right. Life is flowing in one direction. Death comes to stop that flow, or put a clog there. Right. Okay. So, all right, let's go back here to the coronavirus. Let's see. So the coronavirus is the crown, right? And no, the corona means crown, and the coronavirus is a invitational door to fear, right? So who is that coronavirus going to attack? It's going to attack those who are not of fear. It's going to attack those who are away from fear. And to be away from fear is to be where? In love, okay? So that means to do the Ten Commandments is basically you walking out God's order of love, right? And for a person to be able to do the Ten Commandments, they have to hear the voice of God when God suggested them to do the commandments, which hearing the voice of God, which would be the act of faith. And the act of faith is righteousness. So now we see where the target is for the coronavirus. The coronavirus is those who are of faith, because it's there to remove the crown of righteousness to replace it with the crown of fear or torment. Okay? If you are righteous, you are a friend of God. And how you are a friend of God is if you walk by faith. And what is faith? Faith is hearing the voice of God. Now let's go here. All right. Okay. Now let's go back to fear. And okay, so like for example, if a person has an uproar of all of a sudden a bursting of fear, we get put in positions that we're unfamiliar with, or we're uncertain with, and fear rises. That because we don't hear the voice of God. Now, okay, when fear rises, this is Satan sitting on the throne inside the soul, demanding doubt to be heard. Right? When fear rises, let's break this. Let's make it more simplistic. When fear rises, this is doubt demanding to be heard. And what is doubt? Doubt is the disruption of God's voice from being walked out. The purpose of doubt is to disrupt God's voice from being walked out. So if a person heard the word of God, let's say let's deal on the subject of healing from the coronavirus. So the healing of the coronavirus will be the removal of the crown over their soul, right? The crown of fear on their soul. So the purpose or the point of removing the coronavirus is to remove the crown of the crown of fear on their soul. So why a crown? Why does the coronavirus go to certain people? Certain people have already been with fear. Now, a lot of us may equate fear as something of terror or something of something of to be spooked or to be surprised with or something like that. But fear is basically it's a disruption of love or a separation from love. So, say for example, if a person can jump off a building, they're not. They said a person is not afraid to jump off of a building. That does not mean that they're not fear bound. That just means that they wasn't afraid to jump off of a building. Something a thought suggested to them to jump off of a building. They was obedient to that voice or to that thought, so they jumped off a building. That does not make them not. Does not make them not crowned of fear, or does not have. How can I say it? It doesn't mean that fear is not that fear doesn't have possession inside their soul. So anyone could do something that's not of wisdom, and wisdom keeps you away from anything that's going to destroy you, right? All wisdom is not God's wisdom. Let's make sure that is emphasized. All wisdom is not God's wisdom. There is a wisdom that is away from God that makes a man wise in their own eyes, which would keep them in the boundary or in the constraints of fear, right? That constraint of fear is not to be able to walk by faith, right? Okay, so there's the wisdom of God, and then there's, we would say, carnal wisdom or carnality of wisdom, which would be where doubt, anxiety, depression, concerns, worries, cares, all that is like in a is that and so much more is in a pot, and this creates the carnal mind. So when Adam, let's go back to the garden. So when Adam disobeyed God, he fell to this state of a his soul was covered inside of this. In other words, his soul was consumed by anxiety, by worry, by concerns, and by all this. So before the fall of man, Adam didn't know any sin, which means it's to know sin is to not to know faith. So if I want to, let's say, if I want to be a sinner, that means I won't be of faith. And being of faith is what? Hearing the voice of God. So if I'm going to be of, if I'm not going to be of faith, then that means I'm not going to be a representative or a citizen of love. And we broke down love. Love is, in words, if we were to see it, is the Ten Commandments. Have devotion towards God, have devotion towards man, in demonstration of that love. Okay? So, okay. Where are we? Let's go. We are breaking down fear. Fear rises. When fear rises, this is Satan sitting on the throne inside the soul. Okay. So the coronavirus is let's say the coronavirus is there to place the crown on a righteous soul. So if a soul is righteous, or the soul is hearing the voice now we just broke down righteousness. Righteousness is faith. So if the soul is, if let me see, if the director's chair inside the soul is following love, the crown of the coronavirus is targeting those who are walking in that love. Why? Because they demonstrate the power of God. God is love, and love has no weakness. So that is the only power that is most powerful. How about that? How about let's say it that way. Love is the most powerful, and anything that doesn't consist of love or doesn't have love as its foundation is actually a counterfeit to power. All right? Okay. Let's see. Where are we? This is to prevent the voice of God from being heard. Okay. Ten Commandments. Let's see. The voice of God being heard. All right. Honor the Ten Commandments. Okay. Fear wants to sit. Let's go to the director's chair. Fear. All right. When we were made We were created in the image of God, which consists of love, power, and a sound mind. So we was never, when God created us, fear was nowhere near to be found near us. Nothing. We never known fear until disobedience of love came in. When God says stay away from a tree of the knowledge of the good and of the evil, that was going to bring a split to the soundness or to the divinity of the connection between God and man. That the purpose of the let me see, how can I say it? When the enemy influenced this suggestion with the question, does God not know that you will become a God in your own eyes, knowing both good and of evil? That was there to bring a doubt, and the doubt is there to stop the flow of God's word. Of God's voice being heard, or stop the flow of God's voice being walked out. Okay, so the question question is doubt, right? And doubt disrupts God's voice from being walked out. So if God gave them the order, do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of the good and of the evil, doubt would come which would be a question to disrupt God's voice from being walked out. So it's automatically to bring disobedience. This is disobedience within itself. Is to stop. If God's voice is not walked out, there is disobedience there. Because the reason why there's disobedience is because there's doubt, and that doubt disrupts the flow of you walking out, or us walking out God's command. So look at the question that he gave Adam and Eve in the garden. He gave them, does God not know that you will become a God in your own eyes, knowing both good and of evil? Look at the question that he proposed to them. And this question, for Eve, she thought it was good to eat. So she kept it inside of her soul. So now that thought is inside the director's chair. Because before then, there was only one director inside the soul. And that was God Almighty, which was all love, which was away from hurt, which was away from harm, which was away from any kind of danger. Right? Okay. So now doubt is sitting in Jesus' seat. Okay. And the purpose of doubt is to bring a disorder to the flow of God to man. Is bring a disruption, I'm sorry. The purpose of doubt is to bring a disruption to the flow of God to man. So if God is not man's life source, or if love is not man's life source, fear would be. And fear sits inside the soul. Right? Now, fear has been sitting in the side of soul all the way up to the point to Jesus' arrival. All right? Okay. Now, this is the plan of Satan, is to infuse fear to mankind, because he wants to do what? According to the book of Isaiah, he wants to be the Most High God. So in other words, he wants to be able to rule over mankind and everything else. And he already, at that point, I believe that he had convinced a third of the angels to come with him. A third of the angels is nothing, to God. I mean, come on. Talking about God who created everything. I mean, his arsenal is a lot to us, because we can't see God's provision. All right, we're going to break that down too. Okay, so now the enemy is sitting in the director's chair, which that director's chair was only designed for God. God is the only one that will love you without fear. And what I mean by that is that God is so complete of himself, he can only reproduce himself. So if God is love, he can only reproduce love. He is the only one worthy to sit in that director's chair inside of our soul. What is the soul? The soul consists of the mind, the will, the emotion, the intellect, and the imagination. So if the soul is consumed by fear, and like we said, fear is torment. So if speaking of what fear can be, or carnal mind of torments, you know what it's like to worry. If you experience worrying, or you experience anxiety or something like that, that's nothing of peace. So the purpose of fear to be crowned on the soul is to grant the soul disruption of peace. Right? Okay. So, all right, where are we? If we do the Ten Commandments, we are allowing God to take his rightful place as the director in our soul, right? So if God is the director of our soul, that means love is directing us. And if love is directing us, that means we are in position of separation from fear, which means we are a separation from torment. So if we are a separation from torment, that means that we can hear the voice of God. Now let's get down to the voice of God, hearing the voice of God. Okay, doubt comes by not seeing God's provision. Okay, the voice of God is God's provision. The voice of God is God's provision. The voice of God moves doubt. Now that doubt, we broke that down. The doubt comes in to disrupt from God's voice being walked out. So hearing the voice of God moves that out the way. Now we were born into sin, so we was born in the world. We was born in the reality away from God. So now we are in the pursuit to be reconnected back to God. That's what existence is on this earth. It's going back to God, not trying to get a house, land, not try to be a king or a queen on a throne. It's to get back to God, which means getting back to love, because we were born into sin, and that sin is away from the faith, and that way from the faith is a fear. So we all know fear based upon one man's disobedience. So if mankind walk on the earth is to get back to God, which means to get back to love in completeness. That's why heaven is considered a paradise. It's a paradise because there is no fear. Now, if you can imagine yourself sleeping, or I don't know if you ever had one of those, sleeps where, if I can say it that way, if you ever slept that without any disruption of pain or anything like that, or any fear, and you were just in peace, well then that's what we would consider a portion of heaven. When your mind is not occupied by carnality, or anything of carnality is of course is there to bring forth the soul torment, right? So if we fornicate, that's going to bring forth torment. If we do anything that fulfills the pleasure of the flesh, it's going to bring forth torment. Anything that we do to appease the flesh is going to bring forth torment. So if I'm concerned about the coronavirus, that's going to bring forth a crown of torment to be placed on my head. Why? Because I can't hear the voice of God. And the reason why I can't hear the voice of God, doubt has come in, and doubt comes in by not seeing God's provision. God's provision is the voice of God, or God's foresight of faith. Or let's say it this way: God's provision is God's faith. And that's God basically showing you what he sees. God's provision is showing you what he sees. So the voice of God moves doubt, then shows the provision. All right, now let's get down to this last bit here. Provision of God is the action is the action or the thought of God. The provision of God is the action or the thought of God. The action thought of God is the free will of power. All right. Now we have the free will of power, which means our soul is sober. Our soul is balanced. It's not divided between good and evil. It's decided. When the soul is sober, it has made a decision of not being torn between two realities. Okay. So if the soul is consumed of the power of God, it has the thoughts of God. So whatever that it speaks is going to birth or reproduce God, which would be reproduce love. Okay, so all right, we have thoughts here. If we broke down thoughts as action, thoughts are free will of power. So that power is thoughts, and those thoughts are realities, and those realities are spirits, and those spirits is going to be of torn. I mean, it's going to be a choice of two worlds. It's going to be either um, life or death, or love or fear. And the purpose of that is either one of those have the positioning to let's say, for example, if the spirit of fear has the positioning inside the body, I mean inside the soul, it's going to tell the soul how to produce. So that means how the imagination is going to see things, how the mind is going to process things, how the will is going to demonstrate things. It's going to function in that reality. I mean, sorry, in that display. I guess I could say that for lack of a better word. Okay. So if fear is in the director's chair, when that soul speaks, is going to birth the thoughts of whoever's sitting inside that director's chair. So all in all, what we're saying here is that the coronavirus is a crown that wants to be placed on the head of those who are of righteousness. And that's to replace or take away the faith or the connection between God and man. Because faith is hearing the voice of God, and the only way you can hear God's voice is by following the commandments. That means love. You have to be following the trail of love, right? So the Ten Commandments is showing us how to hear the voice of God, or be in position to hear the voice of God, to receive the voice of God. The Ten Commandments, the first five is in demonstration towards the devotion towards God, and then the second five is the demonstration towards how to love your neighbor or to love mankind. So the first five is there to incorporate God's love to mankind, right? So we take that incorporation and we spread it throughout the world. So just imagine if everybody is doing the first five of the commandments, then the second five will make the world a paradise because everybody will be honoring the first five. All right, people of faith. With that being said, uh, you are the blessed. Let's be the blessing. Let's keep walking.